What really happened to Ricky Nelson? Ricky Nelson wasn't just a teen idol, he was the face of an era. His rise was dazzling, his legacy unforgettable. Yet beneath the fame lay a mystery that burned for decades. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't good. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because what you're about to hear is a story that fame tried to hide. December 31st, 1985. As clocks across America ticked toward midnight, the sky glittered with fireworks, laughter, and champagne toasts. But somewhere high above the dark fields of Texas, another light was burning. One not of celebration, but of tragedy. A worn Douglas DC-3 carried Ricky Nelson, his fiancée Helen Blair, and his band on their way to a New Year's Eve concert in Dallas. Just before midnight, witnesses saw a terrifying sight, a streak of fire cutting through the sky. The plane was ablaze. Within moments, flames consumed its tail, turning it into a glowing ember falling through the night. The crash near DeKalb, Texas shattered the silence. 2 pilots escaped through cockpit windows, burned but alive. For Ricky Nelson and the 6 others inside, there was no chance. By dawn, America awoke to headlines that stunned the nation. Ricky Nelson, America's golden boy, dead in plane crash. The image of the wreckage beside Ricky's smiling face hit like a punch to the heart. For millions, the loss felt personal. He wasn't just a singer or actor, he was family. They'd watched him grow up on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, the show that defined an era. Now the boy they'd seen become a man was gone, in flames. Across the country, radio stations played his old songs in tribute. Hello, Mary Lou, Lonesome Town, Travelin' Man. Songs that once felt joyful now carried a haunting sadness. Fans gathered outside his home in Los Angeles, leaving flowers, candles, and tears. To them, Ricky Nelson wasn't a distant celebrity. He was a symbol of innocence, of simpler times, of the America they once knew. And suddenly, that symbol was gone. Then came the questions. What caused the fire? How could a plane carrying one of America's most beloved entertainers ignite midair? Theories flooded the news. Engine trouble, a faulty heater, even darker whispers of drugs or sabotage. Within hours, grief gave way to tabloid frenzy. Every network had its version, but none had the facts. For Ricky's family, the pain was unbearable. Their son, the boy who embodied America's golden dream, was now being dragged through speculation and scandal. False reports accused him of drug use, tarnishing the image he'd spent his life upholding. But behind the headlines lay a truth far more tragic. A man who had given everything to his art, betrayed not by fame, but by neglect. Ricky Nelson's death wasn't just the end of a star's life. It was the closing of a chapter in American culture. His story mirrored a nation obsessed with image, fame, and perfection, where the same spotlight that made you a legend could also blind you to danger. In many ways, the fire that took his life was more than mechanical failure. It was symbolic, the burning out of an era, a generation, and a dream. People said it was fate. Others called it human failure. But amid all the noise, one truth remained. America had lost a piece of its soul that night. And as the final candles of his vigil flickered out, one question lingered, haunting, unshakable, and unanswered. How could a man who once stood atop the world end his journey in flames beneath the stars? To understand that, we need to go back, far before the crash, before the rumors, before the fame. Back to where it all began. A television set glowing in every American living room, and a boy named Ricky Nelson, smiling under the bright studio lights, unaware that the same spotlight would one day consume him. Ricky Nelson didn't step into fame. He was born into it. From the very beginning, the bright lights were already waiting for him. Born Eric Hilliard Nelson on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey, Ricky entered a world where cameras, scripts, and applause were part of daily life. His parents weren't just any couple. Ozzie and Harriet Nelson were America's picture of perfection, beloved entertainers who ruled both the radio and the early days of television. Ozzie was a sharp-minded bandleader who transitioned into directing and producing. Harriet, a graceful actress with impeccable timing, was the warm, smiling heart of the family. Together, they embodied everything America imagined about post-war happiness: laughter at the dinner table, picture-perfect values, and a love that never wavered, at least on screen. When Ricky was only a child, that screen became his home. The Nelsons launched the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, first on radio, then on television. It wasn't just a show, it was a national ritual. For over a decade, families tuned in weekly to watch Ozzie, Harriet, and their two real-life sons, David and Ricky, live out idealized versions of themselves. The lines between fiction and reality blurred so completely that sometimes even the Nelsons forgot which world they were in. For Ricky, growing up meant doing it in front of millions. Viewers watched him go from an innocent boy to a handsome teenager with a shy grin that could melt a room. His every haircut, outfit, and awkward teenage moment became public property. America adored him, but childhood, that private, messy, beautifully normal part of life, was something he never really had. At home, Ozzie wasn't just dad. He was the director, the editor, the boss. He decided what stories the audience would see and, indirectly, how the world would perceive his family. Harriet, though deeply loving, was equally meticulous. She watched over Ricky like a hawk, his behavior, his friends, his dating life. She wasn't being cruel. She was protecting what she called the image. And for Harriet Nelson, image was everything. Ricky learned early that smiles could be rehearsed, laughter could be timed, and even mistakes had to look charming. It's not easy being the symbol of America's good boy. Behind the polite grin and the perfect posture, he longed for something real. His own voice, his own freedom, something unscripted. And somewhere between filming schedules and studio rehearsals, Ricky discovered it: music. When the cameras stopped rolling, he would sneak into his room, turn on the radio, and listen to the rebellious new sounds of rock and roll. Fats Domino, Carl Perkins, and a young Elvis Presley filled the air with something electric. Something that didn't have to be perfect to be powerful. That music wasn't about being polite, it was about being alive. Ricky began to imitate what he heard, strumming along on his guitar, sometimes even humming backstage between takes. It started as a secret, a small rebellion against the endless scripts and staged smiles. But little did anyone know, this quiet act of defiance would soon ignite a musical journey that changed his life and the course of American pop culture. Still, being a Nelson meant pressure. Every success came with expectations, every mistake with scrutiny. The public saw Ricky as the clean-cut son from TV, the one who never broke a rule. But off-camera, he was a young man wrestling with the universal struggle of identity. Who was he when the lights went off? The obedient son his mother wanted him to be, or the artist his soul demanded he become? Ozzie noticed the spark too. As a producer, he recognized that music could add something new to their show, a different hook to keep audiences tuning in. But for Ricky, it wasn't a gimmick. It was the first time he could be himself. Imagine that. The boy who had lived his entire life playing Ricky Nelson, finally getting a chance to be Ricky Nelson. The irony is almost poetic. And the timing couldn't have been better. The late 1950s were exploding with youthful energy. Teenagers were looking for their own voice, and Ricky was about to give it to them. His polished looks made him the perfect bridge between wholesome America and the wild pulse of rock and roll. Still, the pressures of fame never truly left him. Every time he tried to step out of his parents' shadow, someone reminded him where he came from. It was as if the world wanted him to stay 15 forever, smiling, safe, predictable. But Ricky Nelson had other plans. He wanted to sing about heartbreak, dreams, and rebellion, not scripted dinners or polite lessons. He wanted to play his own songs, not just his father's scripts. And that quiet determination, the spark that began in a suburban living room under studio lights, would soon turn into a wildfire. So, as America's favorite son started to chase his own sound, one question remained. Could he break free from the perfect picture his family built without shattering it completely? Before we move on, tell me, where are you watching this from around the world? Drop your answer down below in the comments, because next we'll see how that restless boy turned his quiet rebellion into a musical revolution and became the rock idol who made America fall in love all over again. In 1957, at just 17, Ricky walked into a recording studio and sang a cover of Fats Domino's "I'm Walkin'." Nobody expected much. It was supposed to be a side project, a fun experiment tied to his family's show. But the result was electric. The single shot up the charts, and suddenly Ricky Nelson, the polite boy from television, was leading America's rock revolution. And the timing couldn't have been better. While Elvis Presley was swiveling hips and scandalizing parents, Ricky was doing something radical in its own way. He was making rock and roll safe, clean, accessible. For the first time, moms didn't have to hide their daughters' records. They were buying them too. Over the next few years, Ricky became unstoppable. Hits like "Hello Mary Lou," "Lonesome Town," "Poor Little Fool," "Travelin' Man," and "It's Late" turned him from a teen star into one of the best-selling solo artists in the country. His smooth voice carried a sense of warmth that balanced the wildness of the era. He made rebellion sound like a love song. Every week, millions of families tuned in to the adventures of Ozzy and Harriet, not just for the wholesome laughs, but to see Ricky perform his latest hits. He was doing what no one else had done before, blending television fame and rock superstardom into one unstoppable force. It was the perfect marketing storm, and he didn't even plan it that way. Television gave him what radio alone never could: visibility. America didn't just hear him, they knew him. They'd seen him grow up, trusted him, and now they were cheering for him. In a sense, Ricky Nelson was the first homegrown pop idol, the prototype for every heartthrob that would follow, from the Beatles to modern boy bands. Yet what made Ricky truly unique wasn't just his popularity, it was his balance. He walked a fine line between two worlds, the rebellious thrill of rock and the clean charm of family-friendly entertainment. While Elvis was the spark of danger, Ricky was the calm flame, and both were essential. Elvis made rock and roll exciting, Ricky made it acceptable. Cultural critics at the time couldn't quite define him. He wasn't the bad boy of music, but he wasn't squeaky clean either. He was something new. A bridge, a way for post-war America to embrace change without fear. When he sang, he carried a kind of reassurance that youth could have its voice without losing its soul. Behind the scenes, though, Ricky was anything but calculating. He wasn't chasing fame. Fame had chased him since birth. What he really wanted was to make good music. And that's exactly what he did. His records sold millions, his concerts were packed, and his face appeared on every magazine cover from Life to Teen Beat. Still, he stayed grounded. Fans adored him not just for his talent, but for his humility. While some stars fell victim to ego or excess, Ricky remained approachable, the kind of guy who might hold the door open for you after signing an autograph. His charm was effortless, his smile disarming. There's a moment many fans remember, a TV performance of Travelin' Man in 1961. The stage lights were soft, his voice smooth and confident, and behind him film clips showed a young man wandering the world. It was cinematic, almost prophetic, a symbol of Ricky's own journey, the boy from the small screen who had conquered the world. But success, like fame, comes with a clock. The sound of America was changing. As the 1960s rolled in, the British invasion swept across the Atlantic, and music became louder, rawer, and more experimental. Ricky's clean-cut image, once his greatest asset, began to feel out of step with the times. The world that once adored him was starting to move on. Still, for a shining moment, Ricky Nelson had achieved something no one else had. He brought rock and roll into America's living rooms without scandal, without rebellion, and without losing its heart. He made the wild sound of youth feel like a family tradition. And maybe that's why his story still resonates, because it wasn't just about the fame or even the music. It was about a young man walking a tightrope between who he was and who the world wanted him to be. By the early 1970s, Ricky Nelson was no longer just a teen idol. He was a man fighting to stay relevant in a world that had changed faster than anyone could have predicted. Fame, once effortless, had become a weight he carried quietly. The clean-cut image that built his career was now a box he couldn't escape. America had moved on, but Ricky was still expected to be the same boy they'd grown up with, smiling, safe, and forever young. The truth was, he was growing tired of being perfect. Every stage appearance, every interview came with the same unspoken demand: stay the same. But how do you stay the same when the world keeps moving? As the pressure built, Ricky searched for stability in his personal life, something real, something untouched by the noise of fame. He found it, or thought he did, in Chris Harmon. Chris wasn't just any young woman. She was Hollywood royalty herself. The daughter of Heisman Trophy winner Tom Harmon and 1940s film star Elise Knox, Chris had grown up in the same golden bubble that Ricky knew too well. Their marriage in April 1963 was nothing short of a Hollywood spectacle. Cameras flashed, reporters swooned, and headlines called it a union of two American dynasties. To the public, it was a dream come true. The golden boy of rock and the beautiful daughter of the silver screen. Together, they were the ultimate all-American couple, young, glamorous, and impossibly photogenic. For a time, life seemed perfect. They had 4 children: Tracy, who became an actress, twins Gunnar and Matthew, who carried on their father's musical legacy, and Sam, the quiet youngest, who stayed out of the spotlight. From the outside, they looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, the ideal Hollywood family. But perfection is often just good lighting. Behind the smiles and glossy magazine covers, Ricky and Chris's marriage began to strain under the weight of reality. Ricky's constant touring and the relentless expectations of his career left little room for home life. Chris, meanwhile, struggled with the isolation that came with being Mrs. Ricky Nelson, loved by the world but often lonely in her own home. There were rumors of affairs, of emotional distance, of arguments that grew louder as the years went on. The man who once sang Traveling Man seemed trapped between two worlds, the stage that demanded his presence and the family that needed his heart. By the late 1970s, the cracks were impossible to hide. Ricky's music career had hit a lull, and his marriage was unraveling. In 1980, the couple separated. 2 years later, in December 1982, their divorce was finalized after a long, painful legal battle over finances, custody, and pride. For a man who had once seemed to have everything, fame, family, fortune, it was a devastating fall. Ricky, the eternal optimist in public, struggled privately with loneliness and financial strain. He poured himself into work, touring relentlessly just to stay afloat. The glamorous life that once defined him had become a series of hotel rooms and one-night performances in smaller and smaller venues. Yet even in those darker years, he remained beloved by his fans. When he stepped on stage, the crowd still saw the boyish charm, the soft smile, the voice that once made America dream. But inside, Ricky felt the growing distance between the image and the man. The applause was still loud, but it no longer filled the silence that waited when the lights went out. And perhaps that's the cruelest part of fame. It gives you everything until you start believing you can't live without it. Ricky Nelson had lived his entire life under the spotlight, from childhood sitcoms to rock stardom, and now, for the first time, he was facing the shadows. He was a man caught between eras, between expectations, between the myth the world adored and the reality he was quietly fighting to hold together. The newspapers never wrote about the long nights, the worry over bills, the aching sense that he was being forgotten. They only wrote about the legend, not the man. But Ricky was still there, trying to find his way through the smoke and mirrors of his own fame. And then something unexpected happened. Out of that storm, out of heartbreak, loss, and exhaustion, came a spark, a new sound, a new direction, a chance at rebirth. Because sometimes it's only when the spotlight fades that you can truly see the light again. To the public, he was yesterday's hero, the clean-cut kid from the black and white days of TV. To the industry, he was a relic of a simpler time. But inside, Ricky was restless. The world had changed, and so had he. He was done chasing the past. It was time to chase himself. He didn't want to be a nostalgia act, smiling politely while playing songs from 20 years ago. He wanted to make music that felt real, music that sounded like now. And that's when Ricky made a decision that would redefine his life and legacy. He formed a new band. He called it the Stone Canyon Band. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't have the same teenage sparkle that made him a household name. Instead, it was raw, grounded, and rooted in something America was just beginning to fall in love with, the blend of country honesty and rock energy. Today we'd call it country rock, but back then, Ricky was helping invent it. Long before the Eagles, before the genre had a name, he was experimenting with that sound. Guitars that twanged, lyrics that told stories, and melodies that carried truth instead of image. The critics didn't quite know what to do with it. Ricky Nelson's gone country? Some wrote with a smirk. But Ricky didn't care. For the first time in his career, he wasn't making music to please a network, a manager, or a public expectation. He was doing it for himself. And then came the night that changed everything. October 15th, 1971. Ricky was invited to perform at Madison Square Garden in a nostalgia concert with rock legends like Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley. The arena was packed, over 20,000 fans. Dressed in a velvet jacket and long hair, pure 70s cool, Ricky stepped out ready to prove he'd evolved. But when he started playing his newer, country-infused songs, the crowd turned. Booing, whistles, jeers. Maybe it was because they wanted the old Ricky back, the boy from TV, not the man with new stories to tell. Maybe they just weren't ready for change. Either way, the sound that filled the garden that night wasn't applause. It was rejection. Most artists would have walked away bitter, but not Ricky Nelson. Instead, he did what he'd always done. He turned pain into art. From that humiliation, he wrote a song that would define not just his comeback, but his entire philosophy on life. It was called Garden Party. You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. Simple words, profound truth. More than a lyric, a revelation, a declaration of independence from the image the world had built around him. When Garden Party came out in 1972, it became a hit, Ricky's first top 10 in years. But this time, it wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. The boy once trapped under scripts and studio lights was finally living his own story. From then on, Ricky didn't chase trends or try to fit in, he just played. Small venues, state fairs, clubs across America, anywhere people still cared about real music. And they did. Fans old and new filled the seats, not to see a teenage idol, but to hear an artist who had grown up with them. There's something poetic about that time in his life. Fame had loosened its grip. The spotlight no longer defined him, it followed. He'd found peace in what began it all, music. Friends said he seemed lighter, calmer, almost serene. He laughed more, talked more, finally at home in his own skin. The man once known as America's boy next door had become something greater, America's survivor. For Ricky Nelson, music was never about glory. It was about connection. Whether he was playing for 20,000 people or 200, he gave everything he had. That same sincerity that had made the world fall in love with him in the first place. And in his final years, you could still see that spark. The old charm, the shy grin, the genuine warmth that made him timeless. He wasn't chasing the spotlight anymore. He was simply walking in it. As the years went on, Ricky kept touring, performing, and spreading that message. That being real matters more than being adored. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Because soon, one final journey, one last flight, would bring an end to the man who spent his life trying to rise above it all. When investigators reopened the case years later, they found no scandal, only negligence. Cold, preventable, human negligence. The aircraft, a vintage Douglas DC-3 from World War II, had long outlived its prime. Maintenance records were sloppy at best, criminal at worst. The heater had been jury-rigged by unqualified hands, wires spliced where they shouldn't be, safety notes ignored. A ticking time bomb with wings. The heater sat right beneath the cabin floor, dangerously close to flammable materials. When it malfunctioned during that final flight on New Year's Eve 1985, it ignited a blaze that tore through the interior in seconds. There were no extinguishers on board. The insulation wasn't fire retardant. The passengers had no chance. The two pilots, trapped in the cockpit, managed to break through the front windows and escape. But everyone in the cabin, Ricky, his fiancée Helen Blair, and 5 members of his band, were overcome by smoke and flames long before the crash. In the chaos of that night, rumors spread faster than the fire itself. Some tabloids claimed drug paraphernalia had been found in the wreckage, feeding the media's hunger for scandal. But the toxicology report told a very different story. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing. Ricky Nelson was clean. The man who had built a life on honesty and simplicity had died just as he lived, innocent. As the investigation deepened, the horrifying pattern became clear. The plane's operators had known about the heater issues long before that flight. Complaints had been logged, warnings issued, and yet the aircraft kept flying. Why? Because it was cheaper to risk it than to fix it. In the end, it wasn't fate that killed Ricky Nelson. It wasn't drugs or destiny. It was paperwork ignored, corners cut, and human arrogance disguised as convenience. The final report concluded that the fire originated in the cabin due to a malfunctioning heater. And while the exact ignition source couldn't be pinpointed, one truth was undeniable. This wasn't an accident waiting to happen. It was an accident scheduled to happen. When those details became public, fans didn't feel closure. They felt heartbreak. Because now they knew that Ricky Nelson hadn't died in some grand, mysterious blaze of rock and roll glory. He died because someone didn't do their job. And somehow, that made it even sadder. Across America, the news hit hard again, decades later. For the families of the victims, for his children, and for the millions who had grown up with his music, the revelation reopened an old wound. The idea that this gentle, humble man, who had spent his entire life bringing joy to others, had been taken by something so preventable, so mundane, was almost unbearable. Aviation experts called it a wake-up call for private flight safety in the 1980s, a system riddled with loopholes, shortcuts, and a good enough attitude that too often turned deadly. And Ricky Nelson, a man who had lived his whole life in the spotlight, had paid the price for someone else's carelessness behind the scenes. It's a grim irony, isn't it? A legend who survived the wild world of fame, who navigated Hollywood, heartbreak, and reinvention, only to be undone by a broken heater and a missed inspection form. In a way, it was the final metaphor for his life. Ricky had always been the good guy, the honest one, the clean-cut face of an era that promised safety. But even the safest faces can fall. Even the kindest hearts can be betrayed by the systems that surround them. His story reminds us of something profoundly human, that no matter how bright you shine, the world can still fail you in the smallest, most ordinary ways. And yet, his light didn't fade in that fire. It lived on. In his songs, his children, and the memories of everyone who grew up with his music echoing from jukeboxes and living room televisions. Garden Party, the song that once defined his philosophy, feels different now. Its message hits harder than ever. You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. Maybe that's what Ricky was doing until the very end. Staying true to himself. Not chasing approval, not clinging to fame, but living life on his own terms, however imperfect. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to remember him. Not the tragedy, but the man. The boy who grew up in the spotlight of American television. The singer who gave us tunes that still make us feel young. The legend who taught us that honesty is worth more than applause. Because sometimes the truth doesn't bring peace, it just reminds us that legends are as fragile as we are. Do you still listen to Ricky Nelson's timeless songs? Do they have special meaning to you? Or perhaps you're just discovering him through this story. Share your thoughts below, and if this journey has touched your heart, leave a heart, a like, and a subscribe to help his legacy live on. Every flame that dies, another spark ignites. And Ricky Nelson's fire, it never truly goes out. Thanks you for watching.